What if everything you learned in school about the discovery of America was only half the story? What if the real discoverer, the first European to ever set foot on American soil, lived and died without ever being celebrated, without a national holiday, without a single monument in the most powerful country on Earth for centuries? What if Christopher Columbus, the man whose name is stamped on a federal holiday, whose face appears in textbooks from kindergarten to college, whose voyage every American child is taught to memorize, what if he arrived nearly 500 years after someone else had already been there? This is not a conspiracy theory. This is not folklore. This is cold, hard, archaeological fact, proven by carbon-dated wood, iron rivets, and the ruins of houses that sat buried under the North Atlantic soil for 1,000 years, waiting for the modern world to finally pay attention. His name was Leif Erikson. He was a Viking. He was the son of a murderer and an exile. And around the year 1000 AD, 5 full centuries before Columbus ever stepped onto a Spanish ship, he sailed west from the edge of the known world, crossed the North Atlantic Ocean, and stood on the soil of a continent that no European had ever seen. The question is not just who got there first. The real question, the one that keeps historians up at night, is why does it matter who we remember, and why do we forget the ones we choose not to remember? That is the story we are about to tell. Part 1. The Legend of Christopher Columbus, and why the world believed it. To understand why Leif Erikson was forgotten for so long, you first have to understand the extraordinary mythology that was built around Christopher Columbus, because it was not built overnight, and it was not built accidentally. It was constructed, brick by brick, over several centuries, by people who had very specific reasons for wanting a very specific story to be told. Christopher Columbus was born in Genoa, Italy, around 1451. He was a sailor from a young age, working on merchant ships in the Mediterranean and later along the Atlantic coast of Portugal and West Africa. By the time he was in his 30s, he had developed an obsession, a bold, arguably reckless, and deeply controversial idea that the fastest way to reach Asia, specifically the spice-rich lands of India and China, was not by sailing east around Africa, as the Portuguese were doing, but by sailing west across the open Atlantic Ocean. This idea was not universally considered brilliant at the time. In fact, most educated European scholars and navigators thought Columbus had badly miscalculated the size of the Earth. And they were right. Columbus believed the Earth was significantly smaller than it actually is, and he believed Asia was much closer to Europe's western coast than it actually was. Had the Americas not existed, Columbus and every man on his ships would almost certainly have starved to death in the open ocean, running out of food and fresh water long before reaching any Asian shore. But Columbus was persistent to the point of stubbornness. He spent years pitching his enterprise of the Indies to the Portuguese crown and was rejected. He pitched it to Genoa, to Venice, to other potential sponsors, and was rejected again and again. Finally, after the fall of Granada in January 1492, the last Muslim stronghold in Spain, Queen Isabella Thurn of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon found themselves in an unexpectedly triumphant mood. Their decades-long reconquista was complete. The Iberian Peninsula was unified under Christian rule, and the Catholic monarchs were hungry for glory, wealth, and the expansion of Spanish influence. Columbus, by this point practically a fixture at the Spanish court, finally got his yes on August 3, 1492. Columbus departed from Palos de la Frontera, Spain, with 3 ships, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and roughly 90 men. On October 12, 1492, after 33 days at sea, he made landfall in the Bahamas at an island he named San Salvador. He called the people he encountered Indians because he was convinced to his dying day that he had reached the outskirts of Asia. He never knew he had found a continent entirely unknown to European maps. He died in 1506 still believing he had reached the East Indies. So right from the start, the mythology surrounding Columbus contains a fundamental irony. The man celebrated for discovering America never actually knew he had discovered it. But the mythology grew regardless. And it grew for reasons that had very little to do with historical accuracy. The first great boost to the Columbus legend came not from Spain, not from Italy, but from the young United States of America. In 1792, exactly 300 years after Columbus's first voyage, Americans were searching desperately for a founding mythology. The new republic needed heroes, figures who represented boldness, adventure, the crossing of an ocean, the conquering of an unknown world. George Washington was there, of course, but he was a living man complicated by politics and controversy. America needed ancient heroes, mythological figures from the distant past who could not be argued with. Columbus, who had crossed an ocean in 1492 and opened a new world, was perfect. A poem by Philip Freneau, and then the far more famous work of poet Joel Barlow began elevating Columbus into something close to a founding deity of the Western Hemisphere. Then came Washington Irving. In 1828, Irving, the same man who gave America the legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle, published a massive, highly romantic, and almost entirely fictionalized biography called A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus. Irving was a brilliant storyteller, but he was not a careful historian. He invented scenes, he dramatized conversations, and most critically, he popularized a story that was completely false. The idea that Columbus had bravely defied a flat earth-believing medieval church in order to prove the earth was round. In reality, educated Europeans in the 15th century had known the earth was spherical for nearly 2,000 years. The ancient Greeks had calculated it with remarkable precision. The flat earth myth was Irving's invention, designed to make Columbus seem more heroic, more of a lone visionary fighting against ignorant superstition. Irving's book was a massive bestseller. It was read by schoolchildren across America for generations. It shaped the Columbus mythology more than any other single document. And it set a template: Columbus the brave, Columbus the solitary genius, Columbus the man who changed the world. Then came the Italian-American community of the 19th century. Italian immigrants arriving in the United States in enormous numbers during the 1800s faced intense discrimination, hostility, and violence. They needed a hero, an Italian hero, who could claim a place for them in the American founding story, someone who could say, "We were here first. We have a claim to this country too." Columbus, a Genoese sailor who had opened the Americas to European civilization, was the perfect symbol. Italian-American communities began lobbying for Columbus Day to be recognized as a national holiday, and in 1937, President Franklin D. Roosevelt officially proclaimed Columbus Day a federal holiday. By the 20th century, the story was locked in. Every American schoolchild learned it. Columbus sailed in 1492, he discovered America. End of story. The Viking who had arrived 5 centuries earlier was a footnote at best, a legend, a myth, something from Scandinavian folklore rather than documented history. But the ground was about to shift beneath that comfortable story, and literally. Part 2. Erik the Red, the Exile and the Founding of Greenland. To understand Leif Erikson, you must first understand where he came from. And to understand where he came from, you must understand his father. Because Leif Erikson did not appear from nowhere. He was the product of a culture of seafaring, violence, exploration, and extraordinary resilience that had been building in Scandinavia for centuries. And his story begins with a man named Erik Thorvaldsson, better known to history as Erik the Red. The Vikings were the dominant maritime force of the early medieval world. Between approximately 793 AD and 1100 AD, Norse seafarers from what is now Norway, Denmark, and Sweden raided, traded, and settled across an enormous arc of the world, from the coasts of Ireland and England to the Mediterranean, from the rivers of Russia to the islands of the North Atlantic. They were not simply the horn-helmeted raiders of popular imagination. They did not, in fact, wear horned helmets. That is another myth, popularized by 19th century Romantic artists. They were farmers, traders, craftsmen, and explorers of extraordinary skill and courage. They built the finest wooden ships of the medieval world, sleek, shallow-drafted longships that could cross open oceans and also navigate rivers too shallow for most vessels. They navigated by stars, by the color and temperature of water, by the flight patterns of birds, by the direction of swells, and by a mysterious instrument called a sunstone, believed to be a crystal of Iceland spar that could locate the position of the sun even on cloudy days. Erik the Red was born in Norway around 950 AD, and his life was shaped by violence from its very beginning. His father, Thorvald Asvaldsson, was banished from Norway for manslaughter, killing someone in a dispute, and the family relocated to Iceland, which had been settled by Norse colonists only a few generations earlier. Iceland was a hard, volcanic, wind-swept island at the edge of the North Atlantic, but it was habitable, and it was free from the political complications of mainland Scandinavia. Erik grew up in Iceland, became a farmer and a chieftain's son, and in the fullness of time proved himself very much his father's son. He was fierce, proud, and explosive. He married a woman named Thjodild and settled on a farm in western Iceland, but his temper repeatedly got him into trouble. First, he killed a man over some farm tools. Then, after being forced to move to another part of Iceland because of that killing, he became embroiled in another dispute with a neighbor over some carved wooden beams and killed 2 more men. The Icelandic Thing, the Norse assembly that functioned as a court and legislative body, sentenced Erik the Red to outlawry, meaning he was banished from Iceland for 3 years. In the world of the Viking Age, banishment was a serious punishment. You were cut off from your community, your property was vulnerable, and anyone could kill you without legal consequence. Erik needed somewhere to go. He had heard stories from other Norse sailors about land sighted far to the west of Iceland, a large landmass that a sailor named Gunnbjörn Ulfsson had reportedly glimpsed decades earlier when blown off course in a storm. Nobody had explored it. Nobody had settled it. With nothing to lose and 3 years to fill, Erik the Red sailed west into the unknown. What he found was extraordinary, a massive island, the largest island in the world, covered for the most part in glaciers and ice, but with fjords on its southwestern coast that were green in summer, full of grass, with rivers running thick with salmon and seas full of seals, walruses and whales. It was not a hospitable place by any ordinary standard, but for men who had grown up on the volcanic wastelands of Iceland, it was workable. Erik spent his 3 years of exile exploring this new land. When his banishment ended and he returned to Iceland, he did something that reveals his character as clearly as anything else in the historical record. He named the place Greenland. Scholars have debated for centuries whether this was genuine enthusiasm or calculated marketing, whether he truly thought the land was green and beautiful, or whether he cynically named it something appealing to attract settlers. The Norse sagas suggest the latter. As one saga records, he said that people would be more eager to go there because the land had a good name. It worked. In 985 or 986 AD, Erik led a fleet of 25 ships from Iceland to Greenland. Only 14 of them made it. The others were turned back by storms or lost at sea. But 14 ships was enough. The Norse colony in Greenland was established, and it would survive for nearly 500 years. Erik the Red built his farm at a place called Brattahlid, modern Qasiarsuk in Greenland, and became the most powerful man in the colony. He had several children. The most famous of them was born somewhere between 970 and 980 AD, probably in Iceland, before the family moved to Greenland. His name was Leif. Part 3. The Voyage to the Edge of the World. Leif Erikson and Vinland Leif Erikson grew up at the edge of the known world, in a community of tough, resourceful people who had made their lives on the farthest frontier of European civilization. He was tall. The sagas describe him as a large, strong man, wise and temperate, of fine appearance. And he inherited both his father's courage and, crucially, something his father apparently lacked, a capacity for calm judgment. The story of how Leif came to sail west of Greenland begins, appropriately enough, with another accident Around 985 or 986 AD, shortly after Erik the Red's fleet first sailed to Greenland, a Norse merchant named Bjarni Herjolfsson was sailing from Iceland to Greenland to visit his father, who had emigrated with Erik's fleet. Bjarni's ship was blown off course in a fog and a storm. When the fog lifted, he found himself looking at a coast he did not recognize. A coast that was flat and forested, without the mountains and glaciers of Greenland. He sailed along this coast for a while, noting that it was heavily wooded and not particularly hilly. Then turned north, eventually found Greenland, and made his way to his father's farm. Bjarni Herjolfsson never landed on the unknown coast. He never explored it. He is a name in the historical record primarily because he mentioned what he had seen when he arrived in Greenland, and people listened. Among those who listened was Leif Erikson. Leif was a young man hungry for fame and adventure. The Viking age valued exploration. A man who discovered new lands, found new resources, brought home new knowledge, was a man of status and glory. Leif bought Bjarni's ship, recruited a crew of 35 men, and around the year 1000 AD, he sailed west from Greenland, retracing Bjarni's route in reverse. The journey west from Greenland is one of the most audacious acts of navigation in all of medieval history. The North Atlantic is one of the most dangerous bodies of water on Earth. Its weather is savage and unpredictable. Its fogs are impenetrable. Its waves can reach heights that even modern ships treat with respect. Leif and his men were sailing in an open wooden ship, a Norse Nar the wider, deeper drafted trading vessel used for ocean crossings, with no charts, no compass, no GPS, nothing but their own accumulated knowledge of stars, winds, and ocean currents. They were sailing into total uncertainty. They did not know how far the land was. They did not know what they would find. They did not know if they would survive. The first land they reached, according to the Norse sagas, was a desolate, rocky place covered with flat slabs of stone. They called it Helluland, meaning flat rock land. Modern scholars believe this was almost certainly Baffin Island, in what is now the Canadian territory of Nunavut. They did not linger. They sailed south. The next land was better, heavily forested, flat, with white sandy beaches. They called it Markland, meaning forest land. This is generally identified with Labrador on the northeastern coast of Canada. They noted the timber, an enormously valuable resource in Greenland, which had very few trees, but they kept sailing. Then they found something remarkable. The third land they reached was different from anything they had yet seen. The climate was milder. The grass was thick and green. The days were longer than in Greenland. The rivers were full of salmon bigger than anything they had seen before. And when they explored the land further, one of the crew, a man named Turka, a German who had been Erik the Red's servant and who had known Leif since childhood, went off on his own and came back in a state of great excitement. He had found vines, wild grapevines heavy with fruit. Leif named the place Vinland, wine land or vine land, and decided to winter there. Think about what this means for a moment. A Viking crew in the year approximately 1000 AD is wintering on the coast of North America. They are building houses. They are exploring the forests and rivers. They are harvesting grapes and cutting timber. They are the first Europeans in the recorded history of the world to set foot on the American continent. And it gets more remarkable. The sagas describe encounters with indigenous people, whom the Norse called Skraelingar, a word whose etymology is debated, but was generally used as a somewhat dismissive term for indigenous peoples. The initial encounters were cautious, and then for a time actually friendly. There was trade. The Norsemen exchanged red cloth for animal pelts and, according to some versions of the saga, food. The indigenous people had never seen cattle before, and when one of the Norse cows bellowed, they fled in panic. But the peace was fragile and short-lived. Violence broke out. The exact circumstances are described differently in different versions of the saga, and the Norsemen realized that they were too few and too far from home to hold their ground against a large and determined indigenous population. Leif himself apparently returned to Greenland with a cargo of timber and dried grapes after his first winter, leaving further exploration to others. His brother, Thorvald, led a subsequent expedition to Vinland, explored further along the coast, and was killed by an arrow during a clash with the Skrælingjar, becoming, according to the historical record, the first European to die in combat on the American continent. A later expedition led by a man named Thorfinn Karlsefni, with a larger crew including women and possibly children, attempted to establish a permanent settlement in Vinland. They stayed for several years. A child may have been born there, a boy named Snorri Thorfinnsson, who would have been the first European child born in the Americas. But ultimately the settlement could not be sustained. The indigenous population was too large, too hostile after the initial violence, and too determined to drive out the newcomers. The Norse abandoned Vinland and did not return. The voyages were recorded in the Icelandic sagas, specifically the Grenlendinga saga, the saga of the Greenlanders, and Eirik Sagarauda, the saga of Erik the Red. These sagas were written down in the 13th century, 200 to 300 years after the events they describe, and they differ in certain details. For centuries, European and American scholars treated them as interesting but unreliable legends, stories that might contain a kernel of truth but could not be verified. Without physical evidence, you could not know. The physical evidence, when it came, was extraordinary. Part 4. The Ground Speaks. How archaeologists proved it all. For most of the 19th and early 20th centuries, the idea that Vikings had reached North America was treated in academic circles with a mixture of fascination and skepticism. There were claims and hoaxes, most famously the Kensington runestone, a stone discovered in Minnesota in 1898 that appeared to bear a runic inscription describing a Viking expedition in 1362. Most modern scholars consider it a 19th century fraud, though debate has never entirely ceased. The Yale University Vinland map, unveiled in 1965 and purporting to show a Norse map of the North American coastline, was eventually determined to be a forgery. But while hoaxes cluttered the field and made serious scholars cautious, the genuine evidence was sitting quietly under the grass of a remote headland in Newfoundland, Canada, waiting to be found. In 1960, a Norwegian explorer and writer named Helge Ingstad and his wife, archaeologist Anne Stein Ingstad, began searching the northeastern coastline of North America for physical evidence of Norse settlement. They were following a methodology that was deceptively simple. They were looking for a place that matched the geographical descriptions in the sagas. They knew from the sagas that Vinland was reached by sailing south from a forested land, Markland, Labrador, that it had mild winters, salmon rivers and wild grapes or berries, and that the days there were noticeably longer than in Greenland at the winter solstice. Helge Ingstad traveled along the coast from Rhode Island northward, asking local people in each community if they knew of any unusual old earthworks or ruins that didn't match known indigenous or European colonial structures. When he reached the small fishing village of Meadows at the northern tip of Newfoundland's Great Northern Peninsula, Meadows being a corruption of a French phrase, in a place where French fishing vessels had operated for centuries, a local man named George Decker walked him out to a field of raised grass humps along the shoreline. Those grass humps were houses. Ingstad could see immediately that the outlines were consistent with Norse longhouses. He returned the following year with a team of archaeologists and excavations began. What they found over the next several years was staggering in its completeness and its implications. The archaeologists uncovered the remains of 8 distinct buildings, 3 large hall-style structures and 5 smaller ones. The architecture was unmistakably Norse. The turf wall construction, the building layouts, the style of the hearths and fire pits were all consistent with Norse structures from the same period found in Iceland and Greenland. There was a forge, a smithing workshop with a small stone anvil and iron slag, the residue of iron working. This was hugely significant because the indigenous peoples of the area at that time did not work iron. The iron objects could only have been made by Europeans. Among the artifacts recovered were a Norse-style bronze ring-headed pin or cloak fastener, used by Norse men and women to fasten their cloaks, exactly the kind of everyday personal object that people carried with them across the ocean. A spindle whorl, a small disc used in spinning wool into thread, was found, indicating that women had been present at the site, consistent with the saga's accounts of mixed-gender expeditions. Jasper flintstones that appeared to have been used as fire starters were found, along with iron boat nails and a fragment of what appeared to be a whetstone of a type used in Scandinavia. And then there was the carbon dating. Carbon dating, the method of determining the age of organic material by measuring the decay of radioactive carbon-14, was applied to the wood and charcoal samples from the site. The results came back consistent across multiple samples. The site dated to approximately 1000 AD, give or take a few decades. The margin of error in carbon dating does not allow precision to the specific year, but the consistent clustering of dates around the year 1000 was unmistakable. This was not a medieval settlement, not a post-Columbian European contact site. This was a Norse settlement from exactly the period described in the sagas. Meadows was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1978, one of the first 12 sites in the world to receive that designation. The official UNESCO description states that it is the first and only known site of a Norse or Viking settlement in North America, and indeed in the Americas. The Canadian government established a national historic site there, and archaeological work has continued at the location for decades. More recent research has added further detail to the picture. In 2016, researchers using satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar identified a possible second Norse site at a location called Point Rosie in southern Newfoundland, though subsequent excavations there were inconclusive. In 2021, a remarkable piece of scientific detective work used a spike in solar radiation, recorded in tree rings from 22 AD, a kind of cosmic timestamp preserved in wood to provide an extraordinarily precise date for the felling of trees at Meadows. The analysis, published in the journal Nature, concluded that the trees were cut in 1021 AD, exactly 1,000 years before the study was published, and exactly consistent with the Norse occupation period described in the sagas. This is no longer a question of saga legend versus historical proof. The physical evidence is overwhelming. A Norse settlement existed at the northern tip of Newfoundland around the year 1000 AD. Leif Erikson was in Vinland. He was in North America. He arrived approximately 492 years before Christopher Columbus sailed from Spain. The sagas were telling the truth. Part 5. So why does Columbus get the credit? The politics of historical memory. Here is where the story becomes not just a tale of exploration and adventure, but something deeper and more uncomfortable. A meditation on power, politics, memory, and how human societies decide which stories to tell and which ones to bury. The answer to the question, why does Columbus get the credit, is not simple. It involves at least 5 distinct and interlocking forces: politics, religion, the nature of colonization, the mechanics of popular history, and the brutal distinction between arriving somewhere and permanently changing it. Let's start with the most straightforward reason. The Viking settlement at Vinland failed. Leif Erikson and the subsequent Norse explorers reached North America, built houses, explored the coast, and then left. The settlement at Meadows was occupied for perhaps a decade, possibly less. The Norse did not stay. They did not build cities. They did not bring disease to which indigenous populations had no immunity. They did not establish trade routes. They did not trigger a wave of European migration, colonization, and ultimately conquest. They came, they saw, and they went home. The American continent continued exactly as it had been, its indigenous civilizations unaffected, its forests uncut, its people unaware that far to the east, in smoky holes in Iceland and Greenland, men told stories about a land called Vinland, where the grapes grew wild and the salmon were enormous. Columbus, by brutal contrast, never left. Or rather, his influence never left. His 4 voyages between 1492 and 1504 triggered a chain of consequences so massive and so permanent that the entire history of the world was divided into before and after. Within decades of his first landfall, Spanish conquistadors were toppling the Aztec Empire and the Inca Empire. Portuguese explorers were rounding Africa and reaching Asia. French and English explorers were probing the North American coast. The indigenous populations of the Americas, which some estimates place at 50 to 100 million people before Columbus, were devastated by European diseases, smallpox, measles, typhus, influenza, to which they had no immunity. Some scholars estimate that 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas died within the first century after European contact. It was the largest demographic catastrophe in human history. Columbus opened a wound in the world that has never fully closed, for good and for evil, for the colonizers and the colonized, for those who profited and those who were enslaved, for the cultures that were spread and the cultures that were destroyed. His arrival in 1492 was a hinge point in human history of almost incomprehensible magnitude. That is why he is remembered, not because he was first, because he was consequential. The Norsemen were not in this sense consequential. They left loss or meadows. They left no lasting mark on the continent, no permanent presence, no chain of events. They were extraordinary, brave, and genuinely first. But their firstness had no children, no legacy, no follow-through. Then there is the question of European Christianity and the narrative of discovery. Columbus sailed under the flag of Spain's Catholic monarchs at a moment when the Catholic Church was the most powerful institution in the Western world. His voyages were immediately incorporated into the framework of Christian expansion, the spreading of the faith to the New World, the conversion of pagan peoples, the extension of God's kingdom across the oceans. This gave Columbus's discovery an institutional backing, a church endorsement, a theological significance that the pagan Viking voyages of 5 centuries earlier could never have. The Pope literally divided the New World between Spain and Portugal with the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, drawing a line down the middle of the Atlantic and declaring which Catholic power owned which half of everything yet to be discovered. The Norse discovery, made by people who were only nominally Christian at best. Leif himself had reportedly been converted to Christianity just before his voyage, but his father Erik the Red refused to convert to his dying day. Had no such institutional backing, no papal blessing, no church machinery to record and celebrate it. There is also the fundamental issue of literacy, record-keeping, and the geography of influence. Columbus sailed from Spain and returned to Spain, and his letters describing his discoveries were printed and distributed across Europe almost immediately, thanks to the printing press, which had been perfected by Gutenberg only 40 years earlier. His letter to Ferdinand and Isabella, describing what he had found, was translated into multiple languages and reprinted dozens of times within a year of his return. The story spread across the literate world with astonishing speed. Leif Erikson's voyages, by contrast, were recorded only in Icelandic sagas, written in a language spoken by a tiny, remote island population, not translated or widely distributed, and not taken seriously by continental European scholarship for centuries. The Norse world, for all its extraordinary achievements, was geographically and linguistically marginal to the great power centers of medieval and early modern Europe. Scandinavia was cold, northern, relatively poor, and its people spoke languages that most Europeans in France, Spain, England, Italy, and Portugal could not read. The story of Vinland was simply not available to the mainstream of European intellectual life in the same way that the story of Columbus was. Then there are the politics of the 19th century that we discussed earlier, the deliberate elevation of Columbus as an American founding symbol, the Italian-American community's very understandable desire for a national hero, Washington Irving's romantic fictions, and the eventual federal holiday. By the time historians began taking the Norse sagas seriously in the 20th century and archaeologists began finding physical evidence, the Columbus story was so deeply embedded in American culture, in textbooks, in children's rhymes. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, in federal law, that even the definitive proof found at Meadows in the 1960s could not dislodge it from the popular Imagination school textbooks are perhaps the most stubborn repositories of outdated history. The lag between what historians know and what children are taught can be decades or even generations. Most American children today do learn, at some point in their schooling, that Vikings reached North America before Columbus. But the emphasis, the celebration, the federal holiday, the October pageants, the romanticized posters of 3 ships on a blue sea, all of that still belongs to Columbus. Leif Erikson gets a line in a textbook: Columbus gets a holiday. It is worth noting that the Columbus Day holiday itself has been under enormous pressure in recent decades, particularly as awareness of the violence and devastation that accompanied European colonization of the Americas has grown. Many American cities and states have replaced Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day, honoring the Native Americans whose world was so catastrophically transformed by the European arrival that Columbus triggered. The city of Los Angeles made the switch in 1992. South Dakota began celebrating Native American Day in 1990. By 2021, more than a dozen states had formally replaced Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day. This too is part of the story: the ongoing renegotiation of historical memory, the recognition that what we celebrate and what we forget says as much about us as it does about the people we are celebrating or forgetting. The ending: 2 very different kinds of history. Here is what the full, honest, evidence-based account of America's discovery actually tells us. Leif Erikson, a Norse explorer of extraordinary skill and courage, son of the exiled Erik the Red, grandson of a Norwegian manslayer, reached the coast of North America, almost certainly the coast of Newfoundland, Canada, around the year 1000 AD. He built houses, explored the land, harvested its resources, and encountered its indigenous people. His presence on American soil is not legend, it is not myth. It is established archaeological fact, confirmed by carbon dating, by iron tools, by Norse architecture, by a spindle whorl, by a cloak pin, and by tree rings read by a solar storm's shadow preserved in wood for 1,000 years. He was there. He was first. He was, in the most literal physical sense, the first European to stand on the soil of the Americas. Christopher Columbus, a Genoese sailor sailing for the Spanish crown, reached the Bahamas on October 12, 1492, approximately 492 years after Leif Erikson's voyage. He believed he had reached Asia. He never knew he had found a new continent. He was not the first European in the Americas. He was not even the first European in the Caribbean. The Spanish expeditions that followed him within years would exceed him in geographic knowledge within a decade. But Columbus changed history in a way that Leif Erikson did not and could not. The world before Columbus's 1492 voyage and the world after it are almost unrecognizably different. The Americas were not a marginal footnote to Eurasian civilization. They were a hemisphere unto themselves, containing sophisticated civilizations, enormous biodiversity, and natural resources that would reshape the entire global economy. Columbus's arrival triggered the Columbian Exchange, the transfer of plants, animals, diseases, and people between the eastern and western hemispheres that altered human civilization more profoundly than almost any other single event in recorded history. The potato, the tomato, maize, tobacco, chocolate, chili peppers, all of these traveled from the Americas to Europe and Asia in the decades after Columbus, transforming agriculture and diet across the world. Silver from the mines of Mexico and Peru flooded the global economy and financed European empires. African people were enslaved by the tens of millions and transported to the Americas in one of the greatest crimes in human history. The indigenous civilizations of the Americas were destroyed or severely damaged by conquest, disease, and cultural erasure. This is history at its most terrible and its most transformative. You cannot look at the modern world, its economies, its cultures, its languages, its nations, its inequalities, its religions, without seeing Columbus's fingerprints everywhere, for better and for worse. Leif Erikson's fingerprints are nowhere on the modern world, and that is the brutal, honest, somewhat heartbreaking truth. So what does it mean to discover something? If discovery means being the first human being to arrive, then neither Leif Erikson nor Columbus discovered America. Indigenous peoples had been living on the American continents for at least 15,000 years, and some evidence suggests possibly much longer. They discovered America, or rather, they simply were America, long before any European ship appeared on the horizon. If discovery means being the first European to arrive, then Leif Erikson discovered America approximately 500 years before Columbus, and the physical evidence of his visit is sitting preserved under the Newfoundland grass at Meadows. If discovery means triggering a permanent, irrevocable world historical transformation, then Columbus discovered America, in the sense that his voyages initiated a chain of events that permanently and catastrophically connected the Western Hemisphere to the rest of the world. These are not competing claims. They are different answers to different questions, and history is most honest and most useful when it refuses to collapse different questions into a single simple narrative. Leif Erikson reached America first. Christopher Columbus changed world history. Those are two very different things, and history, driven by politics, power, and the needs of those who write it, has always been far more comfortable remembering the second than honoring the first. The Vikings built their houses on a windswept Newfoundland headland 1,000 years ago. The grass grew over them. The world forgot. And then one autumn day in 1960, a Norwegian explorer walked across that same headland with a local fisherman, looked at the lumps in the earth, and understood what he was seeing. The ground had been trying to tell the story for 1,000 years. It just needed someone willing to listen.